The fact that we can, like, a whole society can believe that thunder comes from a god, and a whole fandom believes a headcanon. It's the same part of our brains. Hello, and welcome to the Gifted Child Symposium, the podcast in which we take our deepest, darkest, guilty pleasures and justify them with academic waffle for your listening pleasure. In this episode, we're wading deeper into the trenches of fandom and exploring the ever-expanding universes of fanfiction and its readers. Don't ask us about our AO3 usernames, though. We will be taking those ones to our grave.
Our graves. Unless we're sharing a grave.
I know. I think we're gonna be buried together. Not gonna lie. Like
with our AO3 usernames.
The headstone is our username.
Yeah.
I'm me, Jean.
I'm Felicia. I'm gonna be really cliche in introducing fanfiction and use that quote about pornography. What is fanfiction, you may ask? I can't describe it exactly, but I know it when I see it. But you probably wouldn't, because you read actual real books.
Not us, like, ostracizing our audience. If you're here, you the normal reader of books, are probably more confused of what a fanfiction is than real fanfiction writers. But if we were to have a definition, because there's truly not one singular definition, on the internet, on Merriam-Webster dictionary, defines fanfiction as, and I quote, stories involving popular fictional characters that are written by fans and often posted on the internet, end quote. We don't necessarily think that is nearly as wide of a definition as we need it to.
Yes, and I think fanfiction is better described via its like function within the fandom and fandom culture. I'm going to be quoting Henry Jenkins a lot in this episode. Henry Jenkins wrote the 1992 Textual Poachers, Television Fans, and Participatory Culture. And in this book, he writes, fan writing builds upon the interpretive practices of the fan community, taking the collective meta text as the base from which to generate a wide range of media-related stories. Fans, as one longtime Trekker explained, quote, treat the program like silly putty, end quote, stretching its boundaries to incorporate their concerns, remolding its characters to better suit their desires, end quote, by Henry Jenkins. This book was published in 1992, but I do think that this description of fanfiction still holds true to this day, which is to say that it is it's a collective effort by the fandom to create a wide-ranging set of texts, basically.
I love that part of the quote, collective meta text, because what we will be talking about a lot is this idea that the text, once it's acquired by the fandom, goes beyond itself and it becomes a collective practice. And when we say fandom, I guess during this episode we will mostly mean like books, movies, TV, but there's a lot of fanfiction of real characters. Like there's a lot of fanfiction about celebrities, about real people. There's author inserts, reader inserts. So fanfiction is a wide-ranging thing, is a wide practice. I think it is important to mention that most often than not, it is based on intellectual property by someone else. So, again, TV show, book. When it comes to, like, fanfiction, I guess, like, fanfiction of real people is not intellectual property, but I guess it's, like, it's not something that the reader owns.
Yeah.
The fanfiction we're going to talk about today is definitely based on intellectual property. And
yes.
Some of its most kind of generalized, I guess, characteristics we can name is that it is non-commercial. No one makes money with fanfiction unless it eventually gets published. It is serialized, so it is like delivered one chapter at a time instead of one product. And it is embedded in fan culture and kind of inseparable from fandom, whether that is the Harry Potter fandom or the One Direction fandom, you know? It is more a medium than a genre, I will say. Like, it is not, even though it is compared to books constantly, to novels and like literary fiction, it is just not it. Like, it is a different medium the same way that books, TV shows, and short stories are different mediums. This is a take that I have completely acquired and internalized because of Zara Zed's video, An Exhaustive Defense of Fanfiction, which I will be quoting more on our next episode. But just to say that if anyone's interested, that is an incredible video essay, and it's honestly like required reading for anyone who cares about fandom and fanfiction. Fan fiction is the way it is because through being a different medium, it takes characters and situations or universes from these kind of like original books, TV shows, movies, whatever, and it transforms them, and it then acquires its own conventions, which is what we're going to talk about. If you have listened to our previous episode on shipping and the death of the author, you will know that the beginnings of fandom as we know it, including shipping and fanfiction, comes from the 1970s with the Star Trek fandom, whose fans were very, very passionate about its two main characters, Spock and Kirk, ending up together romantically. So they started shipping them, and as part of shipping, they started writing stories where that happened, where they ended up romantically engaged. This was before the internet was as wildly used and like accessible to everyone. So these original fan fictions were basically zines that were printed and mailed across America. They were just gay porn, like gay sex and like romantic gay scenarios of Spock and Kirk being mailed across fans. And even before that, we could be saying that people were reading and writing fan fiction in like the 19th and 20th century with like unofficial sequels, like unofficial sequels of like Jane Austen books or Arthur Conan Doyle books, which I would love to consider fan fiction. So all of that said, to finish off the little introduction to the history, I want to point out how fan fiction is so rampant, so insane of a practice and a medium. You probably have heard of Wattpad, fanfiction.net, and AO3 or Archive of Our Own are the biggest fanfiction websites right now. Archive of Our Own, I think, is the biggest one. And just to give you context, there are currently, as of the recording of this episode in November of 2024, there will be more by the time this episode is released. AO3 alone hosts 13.9 million works of fan fiction from 68,000 different fandoms. It is so huge. I don't know how many books there are in the world, but I feel like there are as many fan fictions.
I don't know if that's true, but that is an insane number. Because Mijin asked me this today, like, do you know how many fanfics there are in AO3? And I was like, I don't know, 1 million? Nope. Wrong. And this is speaking as people who are on AO3 so much. It's not like we don't know the fandoms.
Yeah, I have currently 350 bookmarks. I thought that was insane. Like 13.9 million is like genuinely unsmart. Like I cannot understand how much that is. And these are either like 100-word drabbles or 500,000-word novels. Like this is so much written work on the internet for free. I need to say it again. Fanfiction is non-commercial. It's incredibly democratic, and there's just millions of them out there. Enjoy.
We obviously love fanfiction. We'll get more into like our personal experiences with it. But we also want to say that just like any other medium, not all fanfiction is actually good. And like we understand that a lot of it is cheesy, trope driven, etc. We don't care. We love it. We love it. We read it, and we really don't understand the judgment that comes with it. Obviously we're both big readers in general and very passionate about arts and storytelling in general. Like I work in publishing, Mijin is a writer. And we love fanfiction for what it is. Like, fanfiction is such a unique form of art that, as we will be discussing, serves such a specific and special function in our lives and in so many people's lives. It's not a marker of laziness to read fanfiction, nor does it make you any less, like, intellectual or whatever. It's not always horny or freaky, although it can be.
Yes.
As with anything, let's be real. It's not always. It's fun and it's important, and this is our love letter to reading fanfiction.
Correct. And because it is quite a personal argument, we are going to be focusing on the fanfiction we read. I think there's a lot to be said for fanfiction based on celebrities and real people, but we just don't happen to read it and don't have as many like interest in it. Maybe one day we will, but for now, this episode is focusing on fanfiction based on IP, on books, movies, and TV shows. We will not be talking about real person / celebrity fanfiction. So yes, just like a little disclaimer: if you read Harry Styles fanfiction, I think a lot of the argument might apply, but it's not necessarily what we've designed the argument to be. This is for our like Sherlock girlies.
Yeah. And I think also we will not be discussing self-insert fanfictions.
Yes. And like, I'm talking about Sherlock. Sherlock is probably my biggest fandom on my AO3 username at the moment. But my journey with fanfiction started with Harry Potter, as I think most of our generation's like love for fanfiction did, at least. I can tell you with an actual 99% certainty that the first fanfiction I ever read was in Spanish, and it's a fic which is still up, called Dolor de Luna by Dora A. Tongs with 2 A's. It was published in 2008, and which means I read it when I was 10. I do remember being like 10 or 11, and it is a Remadora fanfiction, aka like Remus and Nymphadora, which are like one of my favorite ships in Harry Potter. I did not know my gayness back then. I was so far away from Wolfstar, but that is the first fanfiction I read, and I just remember, because especially with that relationship in the Harry Potter universe, it's so mentioned and then forgotten that was exactly what I needed when I was 10. I was like, I am obsessed with these characters. What happened? Like, what happened in the kind of, while Harry was hunting Horcruxes, Remus like leaves his wife. Like, what is that about? So that is what the fic is. Shout out to all the Spanish and non-English language writers. But yeah, that was my introduction to fanfiction. I fell in love with it. I was so obsessed with like the in-between moments, and I read a lot of Harry Potter fanfiction, a lot of Twilight fanfiction, a lot of crossovers between Twilight and Harry Potter. I love those. And then as I kind of became a teenager and an adult, my 2 biggest fandoms are Once Upon a Time and Sherlock. But honestly, I still love fanfiction so much at this moment, as I am going through my Buffy the Vampire Slayer first watch and hyperfixation. I do have like 4 tabs of Buffy fanfiction open on my phone.
So similar to me, Jane, I also got introduced to fanfiction through Harry Potter. I could not tell you what my favorite fanfiction was, but I could probably tell you that I first read fanfiction when I was 11, 12, whenever I first got access to the internet on my own for the first time. I think my biggest ship back in the day to begin with, because once again, compet, did not know I was queer, etc., was James and Lily Potter, or Lily Evans, or whatever. Yeah, and then I very much got into supernatural fanfiction, and that probably was my biggest source of fanfiction, like that fandom. But I want to shout out the like random ass fics that I've been reading over the last few years, like recently, that have nothing to do with fandoms I was a part of or am a part of, just like fics that I've come across that have made it big in general in pop culture and are being published today. Shout out to Games by Persephone Celine. If you want like some of the smuttiest literature you've ever read in your life combined with like a really heart-wrenching detailed exploration of the impact of the fall of the Soviet Union, combined with like, it sounds insane when I say it, but it's like genuinely a lot of economic theory. Games by Persephone Celine, and it's also coming out as a novel next year. And I also dabbled in some like other random like Shadowhunters, Hunger Games, and I think a lot of it was shaped by the fact that I did write my own fanfiction back in the day, and that was mostly the Hunger Games, I think, if I remember correctly, and some Percy Jackson.
Oh my god, Percy Jackson.
Yeah, I loved Persebeth. Persebeth was probably, the thing is, I probably would remember this better if I'd kept my fanfiction.net account, but I deleted that shit.
Same.
Because I was ashamed of what I'd written on it. But that's where I had all my bookmarks of like Persebeth, like Percy Jackson and Annabeth Chase from Percy Jackson's, and Hunger Games.
So that said, we love fanfiction, we still read it. Because of that, and because of Felicia just mentioned, like a lot of our views on fanfiction have been influenced by the fact that we both wrote fanfiction as well in our youth. We wanted to make our 2 last episodes of the year about fanfiction. So this first episode is going to be focusing on reading fanfiction, and the next month's episode is going to be about writing it. So for this one, we wanted to interrogate why we read fanfiction in the first place, even when so much of it is very trope-led and trope-focused, and can be bad or can be very repetitive. Why that repetition and tropes are beautiful in their own way, and in general, the kind of collective and personal imagination that fanfiction creates in the fans who read it. So there is that said, there's so much to talk about fanfiction. We really, really struggled to even like pinpoint what we wanted to talk about. This just scratches the surface. We would love to make more episodes on fanfiction, fandom in general. And yeah, we hope you enjoy this, because there's just so much to say as fanfiction as like a genre, a medium, and an art form. This is just about reading it, and we will be focusing particularly on certain types of fanfiction we read, because fanfiction has many faces.
So to kick off this episode, let's just kind of outline what we mean by there's just a lot out there when it comes to fanfiction. Fanfiction is very much an umbrella term to describe many different types of stories. I want to once again reference Henry Jenkins' Textual Poachers, in which he outlines, quote, 10 ways to rewrite a TV show, aka just 10 different types of fanfiction. I'm just going to list them really quickly here. So the first one is recontextualization, which is basically just filler scenes between the action and the actual thing itself. So what happened after the battle or whatever. The second one is expanding the series timeline. By that I mean prequels or sequels to the original main work. The third one is refocalization, which is when the fanfiction focuses on a secondary character rather than the main character. Fourth, moral realignment, exactly what it does on the tin. It's when maybe the good characters are bad and bad characters are good. 5 is genre shifting, what it sounds like, turn this soppy drama into a rom-com. 6 is crossovers, which is just crossing over fandoms. Mijin mentioned how she loved Twilight x Harry Potter fanfics back in the day. That's what it is. Put the Twilight gang in Hogwarts. 7, what is that? No, 8, no, 7. 7, I can't read. 7 is character dislocation, which is what we will be focusing mostly on this episode, which is more commonly known as alternative universe or AUs. It's when you take your characters and put them in another world, another scenario. So say you take Shadowhunters and put it in, I don't know, medieval England. 8, personalization, aka self-insert fanfictions. So if you read Y/N fanfiction, that would be that. 9, emotional intensification, which is essentially hurt comfort fix. More on this later. And 10 is eroticization, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the characters having sex.
I feel like the last 4 are the majority of the 13.9 million.
I would agree.
I think AUs, hurt comfort, self-insert, and porn is most of fan fiction, at least the one I encounter on my fandoms. But amazing framework. Thank you so much, Henry Jenkins. This is generally all that fan fiction, all of the kind of shapes it can take.
Yeah, this is from 1992 as well. He knew something. But yeah, basically fan fiction can be anything from a sweet little they're just having breakfast, little one-off, one-shot scene, to 500,000 word epics, to just straight up porn, to like the most mind-bending experimental fiction you'll ever read.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
The only kind of commonality is kind of all of these potential faces and the fact that it's on the internet. And then within that, there's just so many tropes. Like if we just pick one of these, like if we pick like crossovers or eroticization, there will be so many tropes within that kind of category. I do think that there's some tropes that are most familiar. Like if you think of fanfiction, I think you think of there's only one bed. So just to kind of mention a few that I think could fall into any of the 10 categories and we'll definitely be talking about. For me, at least, the classics is there's only one bed. There's enemies to lovers, or enemies to friends to lovers, or friends to lovers. They're never just lovers. Then there's slow burn, which means spending 28 chapters seeing two stupid people yearn until they finally get together. And there's, of course, smut. You know what that means. But I think those are like the most famous one and the kind of most general one. I will say that my favorite is some specific stuff that like scratches the itch with fanfiction. I love an amnesia fanfic. I love when a character just forgets everything they are and they have to fall in love again. Like that Channing Tatum film, but with I don't know, Bella. So good. I love presumed dead. Like, I live for that scene where everyone in Hogwarts thinks Harry is dead for like 3 minutes and a half. If that is a fanfiction, like war fanfictions where one of them goes missing, misunderstandings where Edward thinks Bella's dead, like in New Moon, but forever. One of my favorite tropes. And fanfiction is such a place to find tropes like this. Like, what if they just lost their mind, but also everyone thought they were dead? Incredible. Incredible work, guys.
I think it's interesting that you like these very specific tropes, whereas my preferred like tags on AO3 are much more general. Like, my favorites are enemies to lovers, preferably if it's slow burn. Forced proximity is a good one for me, and I just love hurt comfort in general.
I love hurt comfort
Whereas,
in
like,
general, to be fair. But the thing is, presumed dead and amnesia, hurt comfort.
Correct. But I like that it's those specific scenarios that you just will eat up time and time again. Whereas I'm just like, they have to hate each other.
Yeah,
no matter the context.
That's the beauty of fanfiction. It can be like as specific as the location, like a coffee shop AU. Like, that doesn't mean shit besides the fact that the characters are in a coffee shop. It can be that specific. It can be like this. There's like a what's the name? A subsection of fanfiction, like a trope in fanfiction called Soulmate AU, where it's like, I don't know who the fuck came up with that, but it's like your soulmate's name is written on your skin. Like, that's such a specific trope. It can be that specific. It can be like someone's lost their fucking mind, or it can just be like a vibe, like Fluff, where they just have, as you said, breakfast together, and they just like have a good morning. It can be as specific or as general as you want. There's also song fics, you know, like there's so much bullshit. There's like fics inspired by songs, fics with songs in them. There's a lot.
And for those of you who weren't on the internet in 2012 / weren't on fanfiction.net specifically in 2012, when we say inspired by song fics, I mean lyric line 1, fanfic. Lyric line 2, fanfic. Yeah. Like, it's like the lyrics of the song are woven throughout this piece of literature.
Yes.
I also, like, for those of you who are listening who are living in the year of our Lord 2024, the soulmate AU thing is particularly interesting that you point out as like a super bizarre one, because I feel like that one has just really taken off because of ACOTAR, because like, what's the word, fated mates is such a big part of the ACOTAR world building, and people are going so feral for that. And I'm like, guys, have you heard? There's a whole world out there for you to explore that specific itch.
Oh my god, yes. There's a lot of mating in fanfiction as well.
Oof,
whether
yes.
it is Alpha Omegaverse, we're not gonna get into it, or just like the general vibe. I read so much Remus in Harry Potter fanfiction that I forgot that within the canon of Harry Potter there's no werewolf mates, because that's such a thing in Remus fanfiction, of like the idea that werewolves have mates.
Yeah. And just as an aside, because you mentioned that, as a thing to mention in our discussion of the experience of reading fanfiction, I have gotten to the point where I just can't tell canon from fanfiction anymore.
Same.
There are certain things in my brain that are just lodged so deeply in there that it's like Inception, right? Like, I just assume that it's part of the canon.
1,000%. Anyway, so why are we talking about soulmate AUs and mating and friends to lovers? Which also, Bridgerton is living with these tropes. Enemies to friends to lovers, season 2. Or I guess enemies to lovers. Friends to lovers, season 3. Like, it is living through these tropes so hard. Like, romance fiction, a lot of genre fiction, and in general storytelling is so trope focused.
Yeah.
It's not only
season
fan
1.
fiction. Yes.
Season 1.
Fake dating.
Yes. Big one.
Like, tropes are fun ways to like engage with story and know what you're getting into before you watch it. But I want to make the argument that tropes are like essential to all storytelling. Like, this concept of repetitive elements, whether that is motifs or symbols or archetypes, is inherent to all stories. And when we were discussing tropes, I just couldn't stop thinking of Carl Jung, which, like, my AP psychology is coming out. And because he is very famous for his concept of archetypes and the collective unconscious. So just very quick, Carl Jung was a post-Freudian Swiss psychiatrist and psychologist who pioneered a lot of like the psychoanalysis and analytical psychology we use to this day. Like, the concept of introverts and extroverts is his. And the concept of archetypes and collective unconscious is still very influential to this day. So when I talk about archetypes, is this concept that he borrowed, quote unquote, from anthropology, and refers to these universal symbols, images, and themes that are recurrent across multiple cultures in their mythology, art, and beliefs. So by pointing out how these common myths, for example, about the dark or about the hero's journey, exist in all cultures across time and place, Jung believed that all of these archetypes were inherent to us humans. Like, they came to us in our brain, and thus created this collective unconsciousness. It's something we were all born into, something that just works and we can all tap into, no matter who we are, where we're from. In The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Jung writes, and I quote, "The concept of the archetype, which is an indispensable correlate of the idea of the collective unconscious, indicates the existence of definite forms in the psyche which seem to be present always and everywhere. Mythological research calls them motifs." End quote. So even though this theory has been like contested and challenged many, many times, it is still very influential when it comes to psychology and storytelling. If you read any like screenwriting book, people talk all the time about the archetype of the mother or the archetype of the hero, archetype of the ruler. Their widespread prevalence and the way they tap into a human kind of ancestral knowledge across all works makes archetypes, to me, incredibly similar to tropes. I think I would define it as tropes are recurrent situations that you can use, you can use across different works, and archetypes are recurrent character types. Like, that is the only difference. But they just work. They tap into something that we all know to be true and we all kind of need in certain stories. And they just slap every time. They just work every time. In every myth about the dark, in every myth about the hero, in every myth where there's only one bed. It just slaps. Carl Jung knew that. So to me, it's kind of crazy that people hate on fanfiction because of tropes. Because tropes are ancestral, first of all. They're everywhere. Like genuinely, if you think tropes are childish, it's the same as saying that, like, I don't know, the hero's journey is childish. You know what I mean? Like, it is, it might be something that works when we were kids, but it also works when we're adults. And it works like across so many, just especially genre fiction, but so many stories. Like, there's always a maverick detective in crime thrillers. There's a chosen one. Like, imagine like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Harry Potter without the chosen one. And there's always a meet cute in rom-coms. Like, tropes is what makes genre. You would not be watching these movies or reading these books if they didn't hit these specific marks and they didn't have these specific tropes in them. They're not bad. Not because a work has tropes doesn't mean it's bad. And they function whether it is on a novel prize novel or on a fanfiction. It's just about how they're used.
I think the snobbery towards tropes and trope-led fiction is a big part of the reason why romantic fiction is so infantilized and so, like, kind of people don't really treat it like real literature. Unless it's Jane Austen, of course, because that was 200 years ago, so it doesn't count. But
so true.
I think it's really interesting as well nowadays to look at the way romance is marketed. Hi, I'm a publishing girly. I'll never shut up about this. But if you look at like the boom of book talk style rom-coms, you'll often see marketing graphics that have the tropes on them. So it'll be like, the cover of the book and then little arrows pointing out at there was only one bed, forced proximity, enemies to lovers, whatever. So these are things that people will use to sell their books, which is, goes to show how valued these tropes are by the romance community. And yet there is still so much hatred and so much snobbery towards romance, even though it's like basically driving the entire book industry right now.
And honestly, not all romantic fiction is good, in the same way that not all fan fiction is good, but it is still, a worthwhile genre, and it's still a story that we all fucking love to consume.
So speaking of tropes, I know we've spoken about like enemies to lovers and all these like setups for meet cutes, basically, like, we've mentioned Bridgerton. I think one of the other things with fan fiction, and I don't know if I would necessarily call them tropes, but they are tropes, is the range of alternative universe templates, let's say, like the set of like scenarios that people will drop their characters into for alternative universe fanfictions or AUs. And I think we've touched on like coffee shop AUs,
Soulmate
like
AU.
school, soulmate, school,
high school.
AUs, high school. If you look at the tags page on AO3, you can literally just go through the menu and click on tags. It will come up with a word cloud of like the biggest tags on the website, and one of the biggest ones is alternative universe. It's clearly one of the most popular styles of fan fictions, and a lot of the most popular fan fictions, like in general, not just within specific fandom, are AUs. So that begs the question, why are they so popular? What is it about the characters that we love so much and not so much the universes in which they originate from? And I think ultimately the reason for AUs being so popular is because the thing that we love about the things that, like the stories that we consume, are the characters. The thing that drives a good story is a good character. It is the character that we relate to, what we become emotionally invested in, and as ever, we also just love shipping characters. So naturally, I think as fans, we're gonna want to see them in every romance novel, every context, every situation that we can think of.
Well, yeah, I think AUs is a very interesting, I guess we'll call it genre category of fan fiction, I guess.
Yeah.
Because it is taking, as you say, the same it borrows characters and details from the original work, but it completely, as Henry Jenkins says, dislocates them from their universe, and it puts them into wildly different scenarios. Like, it truly goes from medieval England to the Vietnam War, and it generally has nothing to do with the original work. These new contexts that we put the characters in, which is why we wanted to focus on them. AUs are huge. AUs are long. AUs are kind of fringe on the line of becoming truly new work, because they're so different when it comes to the world building, and the characters adapt to situations so differently than from the original work. So we wanted to mention two AUs that are vastly different from our two favorite fandoms. Again, if you've listened to the shipping episode, these are probably your OTPs, at least they're mine. Mine is Swan Queen from Once Upon a Time. That is Regina the Evil Queen and Emma the Savior. And Felicia's is
Destiel, which is Dean Winchester, and Castiel, an angel of the Lord.
As you can tell, natural pairings.
Yeah.
So yes, so these are two very different AUs. I think we both chose fics that are not only good and not only long, they are important to the fandom. Like, a lot of the people who like these fandoms will know what you mean when you mention these titles. So it's, again, kind of interesting. We're not talking about this too much, but it's kind of interesting how there is, to an extent, like a concept of bestseller and a concept of quality and a concept of fame within fan community. And these are like the ones we want to refer to. So the one I chose, when I think of successful Swan Queen fanfiction, I think of this one. It actually became a novel. The title of the fanfiction is Popcorn Love by Chromed Poet is how I would pronounce the username, but after it became a novel by the same name, the username's real name, or at least their writer name, is Kale Hughes. So Popcorn Love takes the characters of Once Upon a Time, the Swan Queen characters of Once Upon a Time, Regina Mills and Emma Swan, and puts them in a very fluffy, light romance story that I think is just a rom-com. So in this AU, this is no magic, no storybook, no, I think it's in New York. Anyway, it's completely divorced from fairy tale land, any Disney fandom, and also the concept of storybook. It is just set in our world. Regina and Emma are normal people. And Regina is a successful businesswoman and a single mom who, after like a lot of pressure from her friends and family, starts dating again. So for that, she decides to hire a babysitter to take care of Henry, her 3-year-old son, while she goes on dates. This babysitter is Emma Swan, a senior in college who's vastly different from Regina. But as Regina keeps going on these blind dates with terrible men, she realizes how much she enjoys Emma's company. Like, the person she wants to, like, she's looking forward to the most on these dates is the person who she's coming home to, her babysitter. It's so cute. There's a lot of, like, bonding with the 3-year-old. There's a lot of, like, honestly, man bashing and like just terrible dates that Regina goes to is so funny. Like men who order for her, or like it's a good time. It's really fun. And obviously when it comes to the tropes, there's the meet cute, because truly, like, Regina is no longer a murderous evil queen. She is just a little bit uptight, and that is what makes her evil. Like, we completely eradicate this kind of like the original meet cute on the show of like, oh my god, like
Original meet
I
cute on
think
the
it's an
show.
original meet cute, which is, wow, your son escaped, and he's also my son. Oh wait, that's my son. This meet cute is just so cute. They, what's the name? Like, they hit it off right away, and they kind of banter, and yeah, it's just really cute. There's a lot of, it is truly an AU. Regina's not even, a lot of AUs have Regina as the mayor or Storybrooke at least. She truly is no longer that. And Emma isn't the chosen one. She's just a regular girl. And when it comes to tropes of fanfiction specifically, lots of fluff, as I said. There's a lot of, like, they get together a bit after halfway through the fic, and the rest of it is just their relationship. Like, we really get to see them go through really cute stuff, challenge each other, and there's a lot of, not a lot, but there's a good amount of smut, and it's lovely. And it's very sweet and respectful and hot and gay, and in a way that kind of contrasts with like the way that Regina's initial dates weren't. It is really cute. But we also wanted to talk about, like, if I just, it did become a novel, I'm sure it really divorced itself from Once Upon a Time in the way that it was adapted as a novel. But as a fic, I wanted to talk about the ways that it still is attached to Once Upon a Time. Or at least to Swan Queen within the Once Upon a Time universe. And that is that besides the fact that the characters have the same names, and maybe there's a few kind of cheeky, like, references to the fact that Regina likes apples because she's the evil queen, it takes, in my opinion, 3 big things from the original work, or components from the original work and ship. 1, class divides, and backstories. So there is, I think, across all Swan Queen AUs, and I think across just Once Upon a Time in general, this idea that Regina is is a queen. Like, in this case, she is just successful and rich and refined and comes from like a wealthy family, but that still contrasts with the fact that Emma was abandoned at the side of the road when she was a baby and grew up in the foster care. That is always a dynamic that Swan Queen explores within the show and outside of the show. Second is kind of how this class divide and backstories affects their dynamics, because again, Regina is always kind of like more uptight and put together, and Emma is a bit more carefree. She eats a lot of sugary snacks, that's why it's called popcorn love. And like that's kind of like the endearing dynamic, how Emma gets Regina to be more carefree, and Regina gets Emma to feel more at home and feel more safe. And lastly, the thing that I think why popcorn love works and why it's a great AU, and it needs to be attached to an extent to Once Upon a Time, at least as a fanfic, is the found family, the theme of found family that is on Once Upon a Time. I think I said this in the shipping episode, that is why Swan Queen shippers love Swan Queen, because it's not only like, get these 2 girls to kiss, it's like, they share a son, they like build a life, they challenge each other, they grow to each other, they grow into the town. In this fic, like, they become friends with their friends. It's a lot about beyond romance, how this relationship makes them feel safe and makes them kind of build a family with each other. Like, the last sentence of the fic is, they found home. That to me is the distillation of the essence of Once Upon a Time, is finding these characters who are very different from each other, but they find eventually home. And that is my pitch for popcorn love. Thank you so much.
Very cute, very wholesome. I will now share my case study, which is not cute. Well, it's sometimes cute, sometimes wholesome. It's not happy. My case study is from the Supernatural fandom, featuring my OTP, Destiel, Dean Winchester, Monster Hunter, and Castiel, Angel of the Lord, in their original show. The fanfiction is Twist and Shout by Gabriel and Stand By Me, so it was co-written by the 2 of them. And it was originally published on LiveJournal, which is a relic from the past. I was published for the 2012 Dean/Cass Big Bang, and the Big Bang was essentially an event that paired fanfic writers with illustrators and artists to illustrate their fanfictions. Twist and Shout truly has nothing to do with the source material in terms of its context and its AU-ness. And yet it really is considered a must-read for Dastiel shippers and people in the supernatural fandom. It is one of the like top recommended fics like in that fandom. But in fact, for how many legions of fans it has gained, it also gained a lot of criticism for it not really being a fanfic. In like kind of what Mijin mentioned about like it is kind of, it could read as its own work by itself because of the fact that it has nothing to do with supernatural. The characters were also kind of not quite how they act in the show. But either way, it is a fanfiction. It actually hasn't been published as a novel. I don't know why. It's amazing. So Twist and Shout is a Vietnam War fanfiction. It begins in 1965 and spans 16 years, ending in 1981. So to put that in historical context, it begins in the middle of the Vietnam War and ends at the beginning of the AIDS crisis. Tone and genre-wise, it very much sits in historical fiction and I guess like wartime romance, even though the war itself isn't depicted much. It's only in a couple of chapters. So it features Dean Winchester, who is a bad boy dirt bike racer.
Oh my god.
Kind of grew up with an abusive dad or slash a deadbeat dad, and he had to take care of his younger brother Sammy, who is really smart, and he's trying to pay off Sammy's law school tuition. So that's why he races. And Castiel, who is a med student who has been cut out from his family for being queer. So he is super dirt poor, and Dean Winchester isn't super wealthy, but he kind of has like a steady flow of income from taking care of Sammy. They meet at a party, instantly sort of fall in love / fall into lust. It's like that insta love / insta lust trope. So this fic really isn't about them getting together. It's about how they were just kind of always meant to be together, how they fit. It's not a particularly plot-driven fic. I mean, a lot happens, but like in terms of its storytelling, it's a lot of vignettes, it's a lot of small scenes, it's a lot of tender moments. And it's so much focused on how the characters interact with each other and how as eventually they're kind of kept apart from each other because of like life. It's heart-wrenching. It will tear you apart. It's so sad. It has major character death, which is another like tag on AO3. Major character death is not a tag that I usually read fics of, but I did read this one just because simply of how big it was. But yeah, I think the fact that this fic isn't really about Cass and Dean in, you know, in any kind of wacky scenario. It's literally about them being in this alternative time period where they love each other, but they can't be together. Much like how people see them in the show, which is they can't be together because he's an angel of the Lord and he's Dean Winchester. But, you know, like, a big part of shipping Castiel and being in the supernatural fandom is that you get the most straight, aggressively straight show in the world, and you have these two characters who interact so little, all things considered, but you can just tell that there's chemistry between them. I feel like that is very much projected into Twist and Love. It's just these two characters who have really nothing much in common, but they just fit together and they work together. Their banter is amazing, their chemistry is amazing, and yeah, it, like, revisiting this fanfiction, which I hadn't read in years, really made me remember how much of it is just sweet slice of life vignettes with like little cameos from other characters from the show. It's truly an AU in the sense that it's a completely different world and context, but ultimately the characters feel familiar to the reader. They struggle with the same things that they do in the show, just in a vastly different context. So for example, Cass's alienation from his family in the show, obviously it's that he just kind of questions God. But in the fanfiction, it's because he's queer and his family doesn't accept that. And then on Dean's side, it's very much about his struggle, his need to take care of the people around him, particularly Sam, and his own self-worth, and his own daddy issues, all these things. So this fic is an AU. It's completely, like, if you'd never read Supernatural, if you'd never seen Supernatural in your life, you would totally be able to read it. But to someone who loves the show, it feels so familiar to me. It's like coming home to these characters, even though some of them are quite like out of character or OOC. They're just it's the shape of the story that I feel like I've seen before in a setting that really puts the characters through the ringer. And it's also just a really, really well-written book. It's like the writing is so iconic and so like literary and elevated and propulsive without, you know, while not losing the beauty of the language. That is my pitch for this Vietnam War fic.
I love that you said this feels like coming home to the characters, putting these characters I love in situations that put them through the ringer. This is exactly what AUs do. You feel like you're coming home to the characters, even if they themselves are not at home. And I think that's like kind of expanding our question of like why we read fanfiction, why we read AUs, why we follow these characters even when they're outside of the world or the stories we love. And even when when they're like, you know, tragic, like I think a lot of people understand like, oh, it's quite silly to read fanfiction if you just want them to like haha kiss, but like true like fanfiction readers like love really long tragic like stories as well. Like why do we do that? And I think that the reason why we read fanfiction is in many ways the same reason why we watch TV. So let me explain. John York, in his book on screenwriting and storytelling Into the Woods, which I have quoted before, I love him, he talks about how much TV, by foregoing the kind of traditional narrative of, let's say, like a singular 90-minute film or a book, by being serialized, is more about falling in love with a place and the characters in that place. So while we get to see a character move through the world in a movie, in serialized TV, we stay put in one place and we get to see the characters face different scenarios that come at them, or different monsters or different mysteries. So think of like the precinct in Brooklyn Nine-Nine or the hospital in Grey's Anatomy. According to York, these places become home. So not only for the characters in the story, but also for the audiences. He writes it Into the Woods, and I quote, "And so you realize that series aren't just successful because they're repetitive and cheap. They're not necessarily worse because their characters don't change. Instead, they tap into something much deeper. Our craving for safety, security, and love. A family that will stand by us and save us when the rest of the world attacks us or doesn't understand." End quote. I think the fact that we like both chose something that to an extent is about characters finding each other, is about finding home within the story or for the audience, speaks to this need. In TV, we have the chance to spend a lot of time with characters, as opposed to like when you just watch like, again, a 90-minute film, and like after you've watched a couple episodes of a TV show, you kind of already know who these characters are. You kind of understand the basis of the story. You have laid the groundwork for the where we're at, what we're dealing with, and then that's when we get to play. That's when we get to hang out with these characters, figure out who's most like us, who do we like the most, who we would like to fuck, who we would like to hate. Characters in serialized TV, and I think in TV in general, in any kind of like long form storytelling, feel like family because they feel safe, they feel familiar. And thus we love the repetition of getting to see these people we love in like different situations. It is the same with fanfiction. By being based on other work we already know and love, we kind of don't have to engage with like I don't know, new world building or who these characters are, or why we should care. They already feel like family. They already feel like we're coming home to these characters. So instead of like engaging with, you know, a new world or a new character, fanfiction gives us the chance to see our favorite characters and ships interact with a wider world. We get to hang out with them for a little longer, see them react and adapt to things that they would have never encountered in the original world. I think why we watch like Friends for 10 years is the reason why we read fanfiction. We just want to hang out with characters we like. We want to feel safe and we want to feel at home in the stories we engage with. Home does not mean comfort, as Felicia has proven. It just means familiarity, you know? Like, I gave, like, a case study of, like, a really happy, fluffy thing, and you gave a case study of, like, a really heart-wrenching story, which proves that truly fanfiction and AU is not about seeing the Avengers in Starbucks. It's about engaging with characters we like, no matter what the context is.
This is all to say that fanfiction serves a really different and specific purpose for the fandom than the original work that the fandom is centered around does. Fanfiction is much more about the personal relationship between the fan and the things that they connect with in the original work. It's about them finding joy, comfort, like understanding in this fictional thing, and wanting to repeat that feeling perpetually outside of the limitations of the work itself.
Just that you mentioned that, I was talking to my girlfriend hours before this recording and trying to get her to understand what fanfiction is. And I really like this kind of conclusion she reached, and I fully agree with, and I think this has a lot to do with like the purpose that fanfiction fills versus the original work. That I think all art consists of craft and play. All craft is just, it's functional. Craft is about things that work and how they work and are they well written. Play is about, are they fun? Are they interesting? Are they new? Do they scratch an itch? You know, like there's an actual like dichotomy for like this that I'm not really quoting, but I think like all storytelling and all art is a balance between craft and play. And fanfiction, I think, by foregoing some of the craft of world building, it creates like a really beautiful, interesting part of playing that then ends up developing craft in a lot of writers. But when it comes to readers, it is just an opportunity to just like engage with the things that they like the most of the original world. And then the kind of craft of the fanfiction writer is to use these tropes for or against them so that the reader kind of forgets that this is not the original world, if that makes any sense. Like repetition introduces it, like uses the old to introduce the new. It kind of suspends our disbelief that this is based on an old thing, and it allows us to play with the characters in this kind of new world.
The idea of introducing the new with the old, when we were planning and brainstorming this episode, kept bringing us back to the Hades Town introductory song / ending song, where Hermie says it's an old song but we're gonna sing it again, it's a sad song but we're gonna sing it anyway. That's not the actual lyrics, but you get the gist. And that got me thinking about mythology, and because obviously Hades Town is a Greek myth retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice, but it got me thinking about fanfiction as mythology, about how fanfiction at the core of it is just retelling and continuous recontextualization of the same characters. Tell me that's not Greek myth retellings. And digging into a little bit deeper, I, as always, have never had an original thought in my life. Someone's already written papers about this. Ika Willis has a paper out called Amateur Mythographies, Fanfiction and the Myth of Myth, where they basically discuss 3 models of fanfiction and how it relates to mythology. But they ultimately conclude that, quote, the notion of myth as a commons of story and a universal story world, end quote, is, quote again, where we find the richest crossover between fanfiction's creative power and contemporary classical scholarship on myth, especially in relation to Sarah Iles Johnston's analysis of hyperserial narrative, end quote. So Sarah Iles Johnston coined the term hyperserial to, and I quote Wikipedia here, to describe a hyperconnected universe in which characters and stories are interwoven, end quote, aka a mythology, but also fanfiction. The thing that unites fanfictions within a fandom is the original work itself. It's all interconnected, even though they're different stories. So if we accept Wikipedia's definition of myth, which is, and I quote, myth is a genre of folklore consisting primarily of narratives that play a fundamental role in society, end quote, fanfiction is the mythology of fandom. It's the folklore of fandom. I know this is going to sound so cheesy and somewhat dumb to say, but I genuinely think fanfiction are the stories that we tell ourselves within the fandom to make sense, to dig deeper, to find more meaning in the world, in the characters, in the figures that we all love, to better understand it and to better understand ourselves and our relationship to it, and also to better understand each other within the fandom. And it's just very much about the community that you build around this one thing that you all believe in. So in mythology, obviously that is like, what does thunder come from? But in fanfiction, in fandom, it's more like, why does the character always have daddy issues? You know what I mean? Like, it's always about expanding that thing that we know exists, we know is there, and we all interact with it, but it expands upon it and it explains it.
I love this. Fanfiction is the mythology of fandom, or the folklore of fandom, is amazing. I want to stop and say I love Sarah Iles Johnston's thing of the hyperconnected universe, the stories in this hyperconnected universe. The 13.9 million, like that is a hyper serial narrative in and of itself. And to bring it back to your mention of Hadestown, Hadestown is in a way the fan fiction of the myth. Hadestown utilizes new music or an original framework for an old tale. And it questions, why do we tell the same story over again? Even if we introduce new elements, why do we tell the same story? Is it because we want it to end differently, even though we know it's gonna end the same way? That is a lot of fan fiction. We know it's gonna have a happy ending. We read it anyway. We know these characters will end up together because it's a fantasy. Even though in the original work they won't. We read it anyway. There are these stories we collectively create with the archetypes of the characters from the original fandom. The fact that we can, like, a whole society can believe that thunder comes from a god, and a whole fandom believes a headcanon. It's the same part of our brains.
I think another comparison between fanfiction and mythology is the fact that mythology will have different interpretations, just as fanfiction will have different interpretations of characters. So you'll have the same character, but one will be super moody and angsty and one will be happy-go-lucky, and they'll still be the same character and recognizably so. Zeus can be, father figure of the year or womanizer of the year, and yet still same guy.
I also was gonna say, when it comes to the mythology, that I think mythology is very much mentioned by Jung, if that makes any sense, because when we're talking about like fanfiction being the mythology of fandom, it's talking about like mythology as a collective thing, as a collective story we build together, and so is fanfiction. And I think it kind of talks about this, like, whether it is an unconscious thing, why these stories work, or whether it's a conscious construction and a fanfiction at a time, it speaks to the collective nature of these particular stories. And I think it's really interesting because in the case of fandoms, it's kind of like we're creating kind of like miniature mythologies in a way. And the amazing, incredible, insane thing about the internet and fandom is you can subscribe to multiple mythologies across storytelling and across time, across series, which I think gets to another part of why fanfiction and reading fanfiction, even when it's repetitive and tropey, is a beautiful human exercise. It, I think, stems from our need to live inside these worlds that we love, engage with these characters that we love, and in a way that feels like immersive, in a way that the original work doesn't give us the chance. And only fan fiction, when it feels more kind of personal, collective, something that we kind of work with together in the fandom and through reading it, it allows us to be part of these worlds. I found this wonderful quote in another essay by Henry Jenkins, but the quote is by Michel de Sactu. Don't come at me, French people. And he writes in The Practice of Everyday Life, and I quote, "Readers are travelers. They move across lands belonging to someone else, like nomads poaching their way across fields they did not write, despoiling the wealth of Egypt to enjoy it themselves. Reading does not keep what it acquires, or it does it poorly, and each of the places through which it passes is a repetition of the lost paradise." End quote. Honestly, so beautiful. I just love this idea of readers as nomads who move from place to place, from story to story, from fandom to fandom, and enrich themselves from these lands that they're never going to be able to possess. They're never going to be fully part of this world. And I think there is something to this image. I think every story the reader reads, even if it's your 40th soulmate AU, is different and it is new. At the same time that it is part of a greater search for something you need, for something that can never be owned, something that can never be kept. In a way, as de Surtout says, a lost paradise, like a sense of home, a sense of belonging in these stories. I don't know, it just reminds me when people always quote like George R.R. Martin and this thing of like, oh, a man who reads lives 1,000 lives. Like, they mean that reading is, able to access these worlds, enrich yourself through these stories, not only like traveling, but also like living in a way, feeding their minds and poaching from these stories they didn't write. I think that that is the reason why there's so many like OCs, like original characters, reader inserts, or why in a way in the shipping episode we discuss like what part of the ship do we identify with the most, what part of it feels personal. And there's also like extreme changes to the plot, character dislocations, and AUs. Is not only because we feel like these characters from other people's books or movies or TV shows are our family, but because in a way they feel like they're us, like they are part of us. So in seeing them travel to as many places, as many coffee shops, and as many wars, and encounter as many like random scenarios, we get to like be part of them and travel with them and live in as many alternative universes as our characters do.
I really love this idea that fan fiction is us not just traveling by ourselves the way that you do with reading just regular books, but we travel with our favorite characters each and every time to all these places. We take them with us. There is a very famous quote from Sylvia Plath's 1963 novel called The Bell Jar, in which she describes a fig tree. And this passage has gone viral on TikTok lately, but it does really apply to this idea of branching lives, alternative universes. So the Sylvia Plath's fig tree analogy, it's pretty well known, but essentially it describes the main character in The Bell Jar visualizing herself in a fig tree where she sees branches spiraling in every direction, and on each branch there's a fig. And each of these figs represents an alternative life that she could have lived, like different professions, different just people she could have met, people she could have fallen in love with, etc. And she describes her just being so paralyzed by all these alternatives that she just watches as each of these figs shrivel up and die, and she never gets to taste any of them. And the actual quote is, "I saw my life branching out before me like the green fig tree in the story. From the tip of every branch, like a fat purple fig, a wonderful future beckoned and winked. One fig was a husband and a happy home and children, and another fig was a famous poet, and another fig was a brilliant professor, and another fig was E.G., the amazing editor. I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death, just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose." End quote. So, fanfiction is essentially us not choosing. We're exploring all these branches, and there are infinite branches and infinite stories, infinite versions of these characters that we love. It's just a feast for hungry readers like us.
Yes. We're not saying that's a replacement of living an actual life, but but I think when it comes to fanfiction, I love what like this thing of like, yeah, being able to take your characters with you, being able to travel, and how quick it is to consume, how easy and wonderful and familiar and safe fanfiction feels, allows us to, I think, bite as many figs as we can. Not all of us are going to be able to be scientists and astronauts and baristas, but we can all read Bestial being, either of them. Fanfiction, in its eternal repetition, in its use of archetypes and the way it builds on pre-existing worlds, allows us, along with our one-true pairings or favorite characters, to take a bite of all the figs, to lead different and infinite lives. It gives us this space where we can witness characters we love and identify with do the impossible. Work at a coffee shop in one story while being a corporate baddie in another one. Travel through time, go to war, die and yet never die. Have a happy ending and a tragic one, all with the same people. We have a constant through, the characters and fandoms we follow, and we get to live 1,000 tropes and 1,000 lives with them.
All writing is familiarity and innovation. So this episode has been our love letter to reading fanfiction, which is a love letter to familiarity. It's a love letter to comfort reading. It's a love letter to the characters that we love. Our next episode will be about innovation. We're going to be talking about the complexities of the craft of writing fanfiction. So stick with us because we've got more to say.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, The Gifted Child Symposium. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on right now. It would really help us out. Also, please share us with your friends, family, and enemies. You can find us on Instagram at giftedcs.pod. We would love to hear from you. So, because we have shouted our love for tropes, we need to talk about how easy it is to locate these tropes thanks to AO3.
Real shout out to the filter and search function on AO3. You can really tell that this website, for all of its lack of aestheticness, was really built by the people and for the people. Because the fact that you can filter by tags isn't something I just take for granted. Because on fanfiction.net, you actually can't. And tags aren't even a thing. But on AO3, you can search and filter by word count, ship, characters, fandom, and specifically tags.
Yes. It's not tags like, ooh, enemies to lovers, the way you would do with like romance fiction in a bookstore. Specific. There's something for everyone, and it's so easy to find.
So I am on Twitter for work. Don't call me out. I'm on this platform against my will, but I will say there is a Twitter account that I do follow that I genuinely think a lot of people will get a lot out of if you enjoyed this episode. And that Twitter account is at unhinged A03, aka unhinged AO3 tags. And it is exactly what it sounds like. Each tweet is a unhinged AO3 tag. And just to give you a sampler of the world of AO3 and the world of very specific tags. And also, I feel like we didn't explain this well. Tags are user generated. When you create a fanfiction on AO3, you can type in as many like descriptors as you want. So generally people will be like trigger warnings, tropes, stuff like that. So enemies to lovers will be a tag, kissing will be a tag or whatever. But you can also create like literally whatever you want.
Yeah, and like if you click on kissing, every single fanfiction with the tag kissing will appear. But if you write the most unhinged shit, it will only be your fanfiction, and it's just kind of for laughs and for you to read the tags and for you to know what the fuck is going on.
It's like a hashtag, basically.
Exact.
So just to give you a sampler from unhinged AO3 tags on Twitter: character getting railed gently in the morning after dreaming about their childhood trauma.
Amazing.
Major character death, but it's okay, this fic is set in the afterlife.
What? Oh. Yeah. Me like not understanding how you can die in the afterlife. Okay, I get it. I see it. I also have Reddit most unhinged AO3 tags open. I need to read this one. Unexpected Nicolas Cage.
If you ever need some unexpected Nicolas Cage tag in your fanfic, you know which tag to search for.
Intentional baby acquisition, in parentheses, kidnapping. It's so good.
Okay, this one is actually very unhinged, and I think is a side of AO3 that we don't need to talk about publicly, but I will graze upon here. Who better to indulge in your mommy kink than your actual mom?
Okay, but sensual yogurt. This is a great tag to end with. Can't believe one of my 3 OTPs decided to become canon. That's so rude.
I don't want to read this one on the podcast, but kitten, I'll be honest, daddy's going through it.
No, stop it. We have to. That's amazing. That's how it ends.